Welcome to the first episode of Going Dutch. I'm still trying to figure out how to use StreamYard. I don't know really how to do this thing. I'm more of a Zoom guy. Welcome, Tim Healey, to the first episode. It's been a while since we've done a podcast.
It has been a little while. While.
So how are things up there in New York after I'm sure you were a lot of craziness?
Things are good. Yeah, it was crazy there. You know, New York, of course, being an early hotspot in the U.S. for this pandemic, but things are really close to back to normal. Traffic is back in New York City. I've been going to the ballpark, City Fields, pretty much every day. Today's my first day not in quite a while, and slowly but surely things are inching back toward normal. Still can't eat inside of a restaurant, but you can eat outside of a restaurant. So, piece by piece, we're getting there.
Yeah, that's the funniest thing about this is like the governors and all that, like with these rules of, Miami has you can't eat at a restaurant until 9 o'clock. After 9 o'clock, the restaurants have to close because everybody knows the virus only spreads from 9 p.m. to 12, and you can eat the rest of the time. But So how is the adjustment to this weird summer camp spring training thing?
It's been weird. You know, of course, I cover the Mets for NewsDay, which is the newspaper on Long Island. And my job in the summer camp environment is much different from anything that I used to. You know, normally during spring training and during the regular season, reporters can go into the clubhouse, talk to players, go to the manager's press conference every day, all of that stuff. And right now, none of that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Reporters are allowed to go to the ballpark, be there in person, watch the practices and scrimmages and exhibitions. We will be allowed once regular season games start, but all of the interviews happen on Zoom or by phone, which, I mean, there's just a lot lost there. And I understand the restrictions, but I'm getting by with it, but a big part of me doesn't want to get used to it because if this becomes the norm, if MLB tries to, close the clubhouse to reporters permanently, that's basically a disaster for reporters. So big fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But at the same time, it's good to have baseball or some version of it back. It's kind of funny showing up to the ballpark every day and having to get my temperature taken before I can come in. But, I'm happy to do what needs to be done under the obvious circumstances.
How close was it for no baseball? Because like over this whole pandemic, I was at a point where I accepted that there was not going to be a season. And It seemed like it was heading that way. And it seemed like the owners and Manfred kept shooting themselves in the foot, and the players were kind of starting to look bad at one point. Like it just became like one big mess. And how close was it for there just being no baseball this season?
My confidence ebbed and flowed during those months, but I always believed that there would be a season.
Mm-hmm.
That was mostly with regard to the economic discussions. If you followed it, basically the owners and the players fighting over money. Essentially, that's what it boiled down to. And I generally sided with the players during those discussions, but I believed they would figure that out. The question was, and the question is still, can they pull off a season while the pandemic is still going on?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know yet. We're going to find out. But right now, you'll see the headlines, and almost every team has had a couple of players catch the coronavirus. So far, they're still going. But so far, it's been the easy part. Getting to the home city, going to the ballpark every day. Hopefully, if you're the players, doing little other than that as far as interacting with the outside world. But now they're going to start traveling, and they're going from city to city. The Mets early on are going to go to Atlanta, which is a big hotspot. A little while after that, they're going to go to Miami, which, as you know, especially is a disaster.
It's a disaster.
So it's going to get really complicated really fast, and basically we're all just winging it. We'll see what happens.
And like, do you think that the proper guidelines, because this is something that I want to know, is like, I'm sure that the testing is going to be happening daily during the season.
Right. Every other day for the players, every other day.
So when a team is on a road trip and someone tests positive, do they just
Right.
get left in the road city? Like how is that gonna work? That's like if Brian Anderson on the Marlins tests positive, is he like, okay, stay in Atlanta for 2 weeks? Like
that's a good question. And I don't know the answer, but that's the biggest one. Right now, the plan is if a player tests positive, that guy has to go isolate himself for an amount of time to be determined until he tests negative a couple of times. If that's on the road, it stands to reason that he'll be stuck there until he's good. But I honestly don't know the answer to that question. And frankly, I'm not. I imagine that's spelled out in MLB's lengthy protocols.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as they're learning, applying that stuff that's written down in reality, it doesn't always match up perfectly. So to a certain extent, for as much planning as has been done, they're sort of figuring it out as it goes.
And we know one thing we do know is that there's not going to be fans in the stadium. And
yeah,
I saw Logan Morrison, former Marlin, on the Brewers now. He was saying like, that's not a problem for me because I played for the Marlins and I played for the Rays. So
right.
like playing for, which I think is fair. Like I saw a lot of Marlins fans get upset at that, but it's fair.
It's true.
Yeah, it's fair. But like, how do you think for a team like the Mets, who they get better fans, they have like their games are more crowded, like teams like the Yankees. How do you think that's going to affect them? Do you think it really is going to make a big difference, or?
I think it will be missed by the players on the field because it's sort of cliche and it sounds like nonsense when players talk about it, but I think of the Mets' really good second half, something like 15 out of 15 wins in 16 games they had a stretch of, and Citi Field was electric.
Mm-hmm.
Games against the Nationals, there was a weekend series against the Nationals in particular where they had a couple extremely dramatic comeback wins, and it was deafening in Citi Field, truly playoff-like. And players, to a certain degree, in certain moments, derive energy from that, right? It gets the blood flowing, the adrenaline pumping. There's a real psychological phenomenon where when it comes to skills that you are very good at, and obviously major leaguers are world class at their baseball skills, when it comes to performing in front of crowds, if you are an expert at that, then that will help your performance.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to do something that you're not good at in front of a bunch of people, then you're going to be nervous and not as good at it. But so I think there will be something lost. Not only in terms of atmosphere, but perhaps in quality of play, where if the Mets are rallying against the Nationals on a Friday, Saturday night, then it just won't feel the same. People aren't going to be able to react the same, and it's going to be so weird.
I mean, but do you think like a team like, the Marlins, who I guess the better question would be with the Rays, a team that could be good this season,
Sure.
like could be really good this season. Do you think that's going to be an actual advantage of like, they're playing games without fans, or is it kind of the same, like, because road teams would go there anyway and not play there?
I can buy into the idea that prior experience makes you better suited for that situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Rays drawing poorly isn't exactly having no fans in the stands. It's not quite the same as having fake crowd noise coming over the PA system, but it's sort of close. You know what I mean? So I could buy into that. I don't think it's measurable in any way, and usually I like stuff to be measurable, but I could buy into that idea.
It's definitely going to be interesting because I remember like early on when this pandemic first started, baseball kind of seemed like they were the first sport to start with the bubble idea, like where half the team was going to play in Florida and half the teams were going to play in Arizona, which was funny now because that's two of the biggest hotspots.
Right.
And so that would have been,
didn't do that.
Yeah, it would have been a disaster. But like, do you think that like they should have looked more into did they look into more of a bubble situation, or is there just no means other than the two spring training locations to do that?
They did, and they considered a lot of stuff during those early days, April, May, before things really started coming together. They considered pretty much everything, and some of that stuff leaked out, and it's why we know about the Arizona, Florida bubbles, for example, the Texas bubble. Yeah, obviously now if they'd started to go down that road, we know it would not have worked because Arizona and Florida are messes. Shout out to the NBA who's going to try to go for it anyway at Disney. But you know, Florida and Arizona would have been the best options for a baseball bubble. If they were to do it now, you'd have to think about, New York, Philadelphia, maybe Chicago, Milwaukee, major league cities where there are 2 or 3 major league caliber stadiums. LA, San Diego, obviously they're not doing too good right now, coronavirus wise. But it would have to be a situation like that where they could have several major league stadiums, maybe a solid minor league stadium or two, where they could stage several games a day. So it would have been very difficult. And I don't know how possible it would have been. I don't think they got very far down those roads before deciding to go with the regionalized schedule route, which for the Mets, for example, means playing the NL East and the AL East and nobody else.
Yeah, and I think that's like a smart way to do it. Like, because New York, Philly, all those teams in the AL and the NL East, for the most part, they're all bunched together besides Miami and Atlanta. So it's not that hard. But I think for a team like the Marlins, it's kind of dangerous, right? Because not only is Miami a hot spot, but then you're going to have to go through long flights to different cities.
Right. Yeah, it's the travel aspect is where it's going to get tricky. And for the Mets can bus or train to Philadelphia or DC if they want to, Boston if they want to. The Marlins don't have that option. I don't think they'd even take a bus to go play the Rays on the other side of the state. So they're going to have to fly it. And practically speaking, it is getting on a chartered flight more dangerous than getting on a chartered bus or chartered train. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to really say. It is a longer flight from Miami to New York more dangerous than a shorter theoretical flight from DC to New York. I don't know. It's the same amount of people on a plane. If you're on the plane for less time, that's probably better, right? But I'm not an expert in how any of that works. So, I don't know how much of a disadvantage or how much more danger the Marlins would be in having to fly longer, other than to say traveling is going to be a major wrinkle in all this for everybody.
And the 60-game season, and I think I was talking about this with someone. I think this season is actually a very important season for MLB because I think the 60-game season is going to bring excitement from the casual fans who probably only watch 60 games at most during a real season. So, do you agree with that statement that this is actually, even though it's going to be different, it's actually one of the more important baseball seasons there is? Because every game's a playoff game for most teams.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. It's going to be, think about in a normal baseball year, by the time you get to August and especially September, the pressure is heightened. There's more excitement. There's pennant races. And in a 60-game season like we have this year, it's going to be that the entire way. Starting opening day, it's going to be a lot of pressure. Games are going to count for more. And I think there can be some benefit to that as far as, like you said, getting the more casual fan, maybe winning some other people over. When baseball opens next Thursday and Friday, they're going to be the first major team sport to return. They're going to edge some of the other sports by a few weeks. So as far as the health of baseball, and baseball as the national pastime, which we know it isn't quite really anymore, I think there is a lot to be gained in this baseball season. And that goes back to what I was saying before, that all along I expected there would be a baseball season because of that. There is a lot to be learned, or a lot to be gained rather.
And do you think a 60-game season means anybody has a chance? Because on a 162-game season, a team can start off hot and then they'll just crumble down by June. They'll be in last place. A team that we expected to be bad can start hot, and then by June they'll be in last place. But in a 60-game season, all a bad team has to do is, start off 12-4.
Yeah.
And then you're playing a quarter of your season, third of your season, and you're probably in first place or at least hold a wild card spot.
Right. I agree with that. I'm not. I can't say that a shorter season makes everybody a playoff contender, but it certainly makes room for more surprise teams because, like you said, in a 162 game season, people or teams will regress or progress toward their true talent level. But if you think about what the standings might look like on Memorial Day, for example, about 60 games into a normal season, it looks weird. The poor teams like the Orioles who are rebuilding and Marlins who are rebuilding, I don't really expect them to surprise because that would take quite the leap forward. But you think about, the Mets are probably a middle of the road team. But if they get a few things to fall their way and get hot for 2 weeks, that could make all the difference in a 2-month season. So yes, in a fewer number of games, the range of possible outcomes and the possibility that crazy things happen is higher. So we might see, who's a mediocre team? The White Sox, right? They're probably okay, but they made some good offseason additions. And if they're hot for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks, maybe they have the best record in the AL. Crazy things can happen. And I hope crazy things can happen. With any luck, we'll be able to find out which crazy things happen because that means they're actually playing.
And what I'm excited for is you were still there in Stanton's MVP season. Were you still down in Miami for Stanton's MVP season?
Yep.
I think in a 60-game season, if a player just by himself gets hot like that, I think he can carry a team. And that's something we don't really see in baseball that much compared to other sports where one guy really carries a team like Stanton. Right. It's like Stanton did that year and the Marlins only won 70 games or whatever it was.
Right.
I think if a player like that, could potentially just carry their team to the playoffs.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. It places increased importance or potential importance on, the one player who catches fire and carries a team for some amount of time. If as Drupal Cabrera a couple years ago on the Mets was great, and there was the second half of June he was just on fire, and normally that just gets lost in the long season. But if that happens, and if Brian Anderson, for example, who has that brief carry a team capabilities catches fire, then that any given hot stretch will matter more to the entire picture of a season. So wacky stuff is going to happen.
And every injury is
same thing. Absolutely
it's opposite. Once your star goes down, your season's probably over.
Yeah, and if some guy's hamstring is a little tight or a little sore for a routine amount of time, there goes half his season. If you get the coronavirus, the Mets estimate, even if it's a positive test with no symptoms, you're probably going to be out 3 weeks. And 3 weeks is 1/3 to 1/2 of the season. Never mind the fact that if a player does have symptoms, he's going to be out longer than that. So trickies are going to be super tricky. Injuries are going to be super tricky this year.
Yeah, even if you just miss the minimum, it's a week of the season or a week and a half of the season there's every part of the season is the most important part of the season going to be for a lot of teams.
Yeah, well put.
And then what we were saying about the bad teams who could end up being good is the same thing. If the Nationals are a good team, they start off 2-12. It's the same thing that way. A team that the Dodgers, teams happen before where they start off slow and then they catch. If the Dodgers start off 4-12, their season's over 16 games into the season.
Yeah, the Nationals last year, of course, won the World Series, but at some point in May, there was something like 19-31. So if that were to happen this year, they wouldn't even be in the playoffs. So everything that we know, it's a cliche that you can't predict baseball, but somehow that's going to be even more true this year, which to me is what makes baseball fun.
Yeah, I agree. And what was I gonna say? What do you think, or if, now that you're covering the Mets, and I've been interested in this, Cespedes coming back,
Yeah,
and you got some other key guys coming back. How does Cespedes look, and you think he's gonna be he's like, because he's one of those guys. He's like a Stanton, that could
yeah,
catch fire and carry a team for a
absolutely.
15-game stretch. So, like, how important is Cespedes for the Mets this season? And do you think he's back?
My mindset with my stance towards Cespedes has been, I will believe that he is a legitimate major leaguer again when he's a legitimate major leaguer again. It's been opening day will mark 2 years and 4 days since he most recently played in a game.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been through 3 surgeries, 2 on the heels, 1 on the ankle. A lot has happened with him, but during camp, he's looked pretty good, especially at the plate. He's further behind when it comes to running, even further behind when it comes to playing left field. But the Mets have a DH spot this year, and he's sort of perfect for that if he can play regularly. And it to a certain extent, the Mets are going to have to take it as it comes to see how his body responds to playing. Can he play 6 days a week, 3 days a week, more or less? They're going to have to see how his body reacts and what he can and can't handle. But you alluded to it. He's absolutely the wild card. He's a potential difference maker if he can be any semblance of his, say, 2015 self. The Mets acquired him in 2015 for about 60 games, and he more or less carried them to the playoffs. And having a player like that can change everything for a team.
Yeah, and what is it with you? It seems like everywhere that you go, a major league team is going to sell. A major league owner is going to sell their team. It's like you come and they're like, "Oh, now, damn, Tim Healey's here. We gotta leave."
I'll take credit for that.
Where does the Mets sale stand? Someone writes here, how serious is the ARod purchase?
ARod is seriously pursuing it, but I'm not particularly confident that he's going to end up with the team. The favorite right now has to be Steve Cohen. He is a Long Island native. Shout out to Long Island. Long Island native, lifelong Mets fan, Mets minority owner, and a big-time Wall Street hedge fund kind of guy. He's worth $13 billion estimated, and which is to say, as a normal person, I can't even wrap my mind around that amount of money.
Yeah.
But that basically means he could buy the Mets for cash and then sign more or less to anybody he wants, and would be okay or would be financially fine if he loses money on a given year because the payroll was high. So Steve Cohen has got to be the favorite because of, 1, his money, and 2, his personal interest in owning the team. ARod wants to run a team, but I don't know, what connection does he really have to the Mets? He says he grew up a Mets fan, and I believe that, but it's not quite the same as Steve Cohen owning a piece of the Mets, rooting for the Mets his entire life. And so that's where things stand. The sort of the third group in this is a group led by Josh Harris and David Blitzer, who own the 76ers and the Devils. So they already have control of an NBA and NHL team. They want to add MLB to that. But it's going to be, Steve Cohen has got to be perceived as the favorite at this point.
I'm sure like the ESPNs and the media would love ARod, though, to get that ARod Jeter rivalry thing going on with Marlins and Mets.
That would be fun. And ARod, right, is basically trying to take the Jeter path to running a team where he can put in some of his own money, but basically the big money, we're talking about $2 billion probably to buy the Mets, is going to have to come from somebody else or a bunch of somebody else's. So it's not really clear who ARod's Bruce Sherman is, so to speak. But he's definitely trying. He's definitely trying. It would certainly be a fun NL East rivalry, Jeter, ARod, Marlins, Mets. That would be something. Sounds like a circus, but it would be something.
I mean, you can always go the Jeter route, put in 25 million, and pay yourself $5 million a year for the next 5 years.
What a deal!
And then just get your money back.
Right.
But, so when's the timeline on that? Like within.
It's hard to tell, but I'm sort of basing it off the Marlins experience, right? Think about 2017. That took 10 months, from first rumors that Loria wanted to sell to the end of the process, with the deal wrapping up in late September, Jeter and Sherman being introduced the day after the regular season. So I expect something along those lines. The Wilpons, who currently own the Mets, want to close on a sale by the end of the year. I think it could be a little bit before that. So I don't know. As somebody who's reporting on it, I think the sooner this wraps up, the better, because it's a tough story to stay on top of.
Plus, with everything else going on, it's like
no kidding. Yeah,
you don't need it, because there's going to be probably in this MLB season, there's going to be the biggest news story happening every day.
Yeah.
So
you never know what a given day is going to bring.
Yeah. And one last thing, during the pandemic, I saw that you had tweeted one of your favorite moments when you're talking about the Jose, day, and you tweeted it out. You wrote about the day.
Yeah, that was something that NewsDay's been doing, where because there was no sports going on, we were each writing about the most memorable games that we've covered, and September 26, 2016, the day after Jose Fernandez died, is absolutely the most memorable game I've ever covered.
We're coming on close to, I can't believe it's already been 4 years, but we're coming up on 4 years on that.
Yeah, his birthday's in a couple of weeks.
Going back to that day, talk us through that day. What was that like from a reporter's standpoint?
The most insane thing I've ever experienced as a reporter. You're talking about the day of or the day after when they played the Mets?
The day of and then the day after, I guess.
Well, I woke up, it's a Sunday, and it was a day game. So I was waking up at 8 o'clock as it was, and I woke up to a call from my editor who said that he saw a report that Jose Fernandez died in a boat crash, which was just you couldn't even wrap your head around it. How could that possibly have happened? So you shoot out of bed. I open my computer. Don't even brush my teeth before I start working, which is always, that's how you know it's going to be a day, when you have to start working before you brush your teeth. And then the Marlins shortly, just minutes later, really confirmed it and said that the game was postponed. And it's just so crazy. You get to the ballpark and you don't really know what to expect. But, you're just waiting for a press conference, which, how do you even have a press conference about this? People, I'm sure anybody who lived in Miami or followed it remembers the images of, Mattingly, Sampson, Martin Prado sitting at that table in tears talking about it. The rest of the Marlins standing behind them. During the first couple of hours at the ballpark before the press conference, I specifically remember transcribing an interview with Jose Fernandez. Clark Spencer of the Herald and I talked to him the Saturday afternoon, so about 12 hours before he died. And it stayed with me how excited he was for the Marlins' future, because think about where the Marlins were at that point. They were a fringe wild card team down the stretch in 2016, never really in it. But their rebuild looked over. They weren't rebuilding anymore. They were basically rebuilt. Stanton ended up breaking out that next year. Ozuna and Yelich were coming off good years. JT Realmuto, people were starting to realize, was one of the best catchers in baseball, probably now the best catcher in baseball. D. Gordon was really good. So the pieces were there. I don't need to tell that to anybody who followed it. But Jose was excited, and he was talking about how after that last start, he was going to start his off-season training program the day after the season, and he was going to do a whole lot of bicycling, and he was going to talk with Barry Bonds about it because that was something they had in common. So it was just stunning to hear him say that, and then the next day to be covering his death, which is just you can't. I still now thinking about it, it's hard to wrap my mind around. And then you go through the day at the ballpark where there's a press conference and an investigation going on at the scene of the crash, and people starting to show up at the ballpark fan wise with that makeshift tribute to him right outside the ballpark there. So there was just so much going on. I don't remember how it came up, but I ended up finding his address too, like the house that he owned somewhere else in Miami. So I just ended up taking a drive over there just to, I wasn't going to intrude or anything. I just wanted to drive by to see what was going on. And there were a lot of cars at the house.
Yeah.
I think it was the house that he had bought for his mom.
Mm-hmm.
So even now looking back on it, it's still so surreal. And then the next day, when they get back to playing baseball, it's just like, how do I even write about baseball? And that was true the first day. It's maybe a little easier because you're obviously not going to be writing about baseball. You're going to be writing about these people going to work the day after their friend and teammate died. So that was a heck of a day. But then it got more complicated in the last 6 days of the season. It was right at the end of the year. How do I balance writing about these games, which don't matter in a baseball sense and really don't matter in a life sense, with the fact that, with the circumstances. So it was, as I've written about baseball the last few years, I've been fortunate to cover, All-Star games, World Series, things like that. Things where I can say, oh, that's really cool that I was there and I was fortunate enough to cover that. David Wright's last game is another one. And that is on the list, but in a different way, because I wasn't happy to be there. But I don't know how anything can ever top that in terms of insane stuff to cover and write about.
Yeah, I mean, I went to the game as a fan, and it's still the most surreal moment. I mean, I've been lucky enough to not really deal with deaths in a personal matter, but it's probably one of the most surreal moments of my life, just being there and being at a sporting event that wasn't really a sporting event.
Right.
It just felt like you were at some moment that you would never forget in your life, and there just happened to be a baseball game being played,
right?
Which you really wasn't even paying attention to because you were looking around the field to see how this player was reacting and how that player was reacting during the game.
Yeah,
and it was just so strange. And I'll never forget or you see the pictures of Stanton, big strong Mike Stanton just bawling his eyes out before a game.
The D. Gordon home run.
The D. Gordon. I was about to ask, where does that moment fall in baseball history?
And D. Gordon?
Yeah.
Up there with one of the most emotional home runs of all time. And Mike Piazza in the Mets' first game after 9/11 probably topped it just because it's a tragedy on such a larger scale. But it's right there. It's right there near the top. I still can't believe it. The ball came off the bat, and I thought, that's well struck. Yeah. And the next thing you know, it lands in the upper deck, and I think, no way. That's insane. And then, the trip around the bases, D. Gordon could barely get to home plate. By the time he got 3/4 of the way, 4/5 of the way to home, from third to home, he basically walked the last few steps. Barry Bonds was the first one in the dugout to, hug him. It was just hug after hug in the dugout. And there's a great photo out there from a Sun Sentinel photographer whose name escapes me. But it's D. Gordon bawling, and on one side is Lorenzo Bundy, who was a Marlins coach, and on the other side, Derek Dietrich, who is a ripped as machismo baseball player as it gets, and they're all crying, and they're trying to comfort D. Gordon, but they're also inconsolable, and it was just really an insane moment amid an insane couple of days. that it stays with you.
And I tend to remember which I think escapes a lot of people, is the Bohr triple.
Yes, that was a nice story.
Yeah.
During this depressing day, Justin Bohr, I think I described him in that story where I was recounting the most memorable game as burly and not fast.
Yeah.
And he tripled. He really ran into one. I don't remember exactly where it went so that he ended up on third, but it must have been right or right center or somewhere over there. And then he tripled, big belly flop slide into third for the first triple of his major league career. And I distinctly remember the people in the Marlins dugout cheering, smiling, and I thought, wow, like that's a solid moment right there. We got the tears with the D. Gordon home run, and now we got the smiles at Justin Bohr, of all people, tripling.
Yeah, it was just like a lot of like fitting moments just coming into one game, and like it's definitely the most memorable sporting event I'll ever go to. I mean, I'll go back. I try not to watch it because it's sad, but like I'll go back and watch that game and still like can't believe all the things that happened, and let alone that they like actually played it.
Right.
Like, and then the Mets coming out, that pregame Mets. Have you talked to like anybody that was playing in that game from the Mets perspective on it?
I haven't.
I'm trying to think on top of my head if there's still guys on. There should be the Syndergaard and them.
There are a couple, but the team turned over mostly, and it really just doesn't come up. Like I wouldn't want to approach a guy and be like, "Hey, remember that super depressing game you guys played?" Like, right? But it's as much as it is like a crazy memory. I don't know that it comes up that often day to day in conversation. I mean, it pops into my mind all the time, to be honest. But it doesn't. It doesn't come up really in conversation with the Mets too often.
Yeah. And anyway, man, I appreciate you coming on for this episode. You can catch Tim on Twitter at Tim B. Healey. See him on Newsday with all his great articles. I appreciate you.
Newsday.com/Mets. They can read all about the Mets.
I hope you stay safe this season. Are you traveling? Are you going to be traveling?
Yeah, I'll be traveling. A couple cities that are current messes are a little up in the air. So I don't know if I'll come to Miami. I don't know about Atlanta, but Philly, Boston, D.C., I'm planning to go to all those places. So, looking forward to getting back into the routine.
Okay, man. I hope you stay safe in that.
Right back at you, and good luck with the new pod. I hope it is a wild success.
Thank you so much.
You got it.